Chad just dropped a geopolitical bombshell, joining forces with Traore and sending a stark warning to France and the US. Africa will no longer be controlled. Borders are shifting, alliances cracking, and the West is panicking behind closed doors. But what happens next? Will this bold move spark a new African power era or ignite a dangerous conflict the world isn't ready for? Keep watching to find out. Chad just flipped the board, and the West didn't see it coming. For decades, this landlocked nation sat at the heart of France's military empire in the Sahel, a quiet fortress where foreign boots hit the ground and foreign agendas took root. Washington leaned on it. Paris claimed it. Chad was the anchor, until it wasn't. Because in one seismic move, Chad walked away from the table, turned its back on the old powers, and joined the Alliance of Sahel States. This wasn't a handshake. This was a declaration. And the shockwaves are still rumbling across the continent. You need to understand what just shattered. Chad wasn't just another partner. It was the partner. French troops used it as a launchpad. American drones lifted off from its soil. For years, Chad's borders became Western borders, its sovereignty negotiated in foreign capitals, its future written in languages that weren't its own. But something shifted. The Alliance of Sahel States, born out of frustration, forged in defiance, extended an invitation. And Chad didn't hesitate. It joined Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger in a bloc that's rewriting the rules of African autonomy. This is the kind of move that doesn't just change policy, it changes power. What no one expected was the speed. No long negotiations, no public warnings, just action. Chad's leadership made it clear. The days of outsourcing sovereignty are over. This alliance isn't about ideology. It's about control. Control over resources that have been extracted for centuries. Control over borders that have been patrolled by foreign forces. Control over a future that's been designed elsewhere. And now, Chad is claiming it back. The message to Paris and Washington is brutal in its simplicity. Your era here is ending. Is this the turning point, or just the beginning of a much bigger rupture? Drop your take, because what's happening behind closed doors is even more intense. France is reeling. For decades, Chad was the backbone of its Sahel strategy, the last reliable pillar in a region where French influence has been crumbling. Burkina Faso kicked them out. Niger expelled their troops. Mali told them to leave. And now Chad, the crown jewel, has walked away. This isn't just a military loss, it's a geopolitical collapse. The logic that kept France relevant in West and Central Africa for generations just evaporated, and Chad did it without flinching. But this move isn't just anti-Western, it's pro-sovereignty. The Alliance of Sahel States isn't a rejection for rejection's sake. It's a recalibration, a recognition that security, development, and governance can't be outsourced forever. Chad is betting that regional solidarity offers more stability than foreign dependency ever did, and the stakes are astronomical. If this alliance holds, it reshapes everything: trade routes, security architecture, diplomatic leverage. Africa's internal affairs, once dictated by external actors, are now being negotiated by Africans. That's the shift. That's the threat. What's wild is the timing. The US is already stretched thin globally. France is politically fractured at home and militarily overstretched abroad. And Chad just chose the moment when the West was most vulnerable and made its move. That's not coincidence. That's strategy. This wasn't just a speech, it was a warning. A calculated play that says, we see your weakness, and we're done waiting for permission. The old guard is scrambling. Diplomats are making calls. Intelligence agencies are assessing risk. But here's the truth. Chad's decision isn't reversible. Once you step into sovereignty like this, there's no going back. The Alliance of Sahel States now controls a corridor of power that stretches across some of the most resource-rich, strategically vital territory on the continent. And Chad just became its eastern anchor. He came for sovereignty. He built different, and the world just found out why. What happens next will determine whether this is the spark that ignites a broader African realignment or the beginning of a new Cold War on the continent. Either way, Chad just rewrote the script, and the West is still reading the first page. Ibrahim Traoré doesn't ask for permission, and now, neither does Chad. What you're witnessing isn't just an alliance. It's a coordinated strike against decades of Western control. A unified front that's rewriting the rules of engagement across West and Central Africa. And it's happening faster than anyone thought possible. Traoré, the young revolutionary who stormed into power in Burkina Faso with fire in his eyes and a rifle on his back, just found his strongest ally. Chad didn't just join the Alliance of Sahel States. It joined Traoré's vision, and together they're building something the West never prepared for. A bloc that refuses to bow. This partnership isn't accidental, it's surgical. Traoré has spent the last 2 years dismantling French influence in Burkina Faso, kicking out troops, shutting down bases, and telling Paris exactly where it can take its so-called security guarantees. He became the face of a new African defiance, the leader who said what others were too afraid to whisper. And now, Chad is standing beside him, not behind him, beside him. That distinction matters, because what's forming here isn't a one-man show, it's a movement. A coalition of nations that are done being managed, manipulated, and militarized by foreign powers who never had their best interests at heart. The strategy is ruthless in its clarity. Military coordination, economic alignment, diplomatic synchronization. Traoré and Chad aren't just talking about sovereignty, they're operationalizing it. Joint operations, shared intelligence, unified messaging, the kind of collaboration that makes Western capitals nervous because it's not theoretical anymore. It's real, and it's expanding. The Alliance of Sahel States now stretches from Burkina Faso through Niger and Mali, all the way to Chad's eastern frontier. That's not just geography, that's power. Power that wasn't handed down, power that was seized. Is this the moment Africa takes back control? Or is it the spark that ignites a new conflict? Drop your take, because what's brewing behind the scenes is even more explosive. What's shaking the old order is the message. Traoré and Chad aren't hiding their intent. They're broadcasting it. Every joint statement, every military parade, every diplomatic maneuver is a warning shot to the West. Your era of interference is over. You don't get to destabilize governments anymore. You don't get to extract resources without consequence. You don't get to dictate who leads and who falls. The playbook that worked for a century just got burned, and Traoré is holding the match. The West is scrambling. France, already expelled from multiple Sahel nations, is watching its last foothold crumble. The United States, which relied on Chad as a counter-terrorism anchor, is now forced to recalibrate an entire regional strategy. And the African Union, watching in silence as a new power center emerges, one that doesn't need permission from Addis Ababa or validation from Brussels. This is lateral power, horizontal solidarity, the kind that reshapes continents. But here's what makes this alliance so dangerous to the status quo. It's contagious. Other nations are watching. Other leaders are calculating. If Traoré and Chad can pull this off, if they can maintain sovereignty, build economic resilience, and secure their borders without Western troops, then the entire logic of dependency collapses. And that terrifies the old powers. Because once the myth of indispensability breaks, it doesn't come back. He came for sovereignty, and he brought backup. What no one expected was how fast the dominoes would fall. Burkina Faso was the spark. Niger was the fuel. Mali was the flame. And now Chad is the wildfire. This wasn't just a partnership. It was a reckoning. A generation of African leaders who grew up watching their nations hollowed out by foreign interests, who saw their resources stolen and their people ignored, are now in power. And they remember. The unity between Traore and Chad isn't just symbolic, it's structural. It signals to every regional actor that autonomy is possible, that breaking free doesn't mean isolation, that sovereignty doesn't require permission, and that's the real threat, not to Africa, to everyone who profited from its division. So what happens next? Does this alliance hold? Or does the West find a way to fracture it from within? Comment your prediction, because the next move is already in motion. Traore and Chad just redrew the map, and the world is still trying to read it. The streets are buzzing, and for the first time in years, it's not with fear, it's with hope. Chad just joined the Alliance of Sahel States, locking arms with Ibrahim Traoré and a bloc of nations that are done waiting for permission to lead their own lives. And the people? They're watching this unfold like a revolution in real time. Because this isn't just diplomacy happening in marble halls and closed-door meetings. This is personal. This is a generation of young Africans who grew up watching foreign powers pull strings, watching their own elites sell out, watching their futures written in languages they didn't speak. And now, finally, they're seeing something different. Leaders who look like them, leaders who speak for them, leaders who are choosing sovereignty over survival scraps from the West. Walk through N'Djamena, Ouagadougou, Bamako, Niamey. The energy is electric. The youth aren't just talking about politics anymore. They're claiming it. Social media is ablaze with pride, with defiance, with a sense that something tectonic just shifted beneath their feet. Chad's decision to join AES isn't being debated in think tanks alone. It's being celebrated in markets, discussed in classrooms, argued over in barbershops, because this move is theirs. It's not another foreign intervention dressed up as aid. It's not another elite pact that leaves the masses behind. This is a Sahel-led bloc that's telling the world we're taking this back. And Traoré, he's become more than a leader. He's become a symbol. The young captain who stood up to France and didn't flinch. The revolutionary who told the old powers that their time was up. Now, with Chad standing beside him, that symbol has weight. It has structure. It has momentum. The alliance isn't just ideological anymore. It's operational. And the people feel it. They see their leaders coordinating security without Western troops. They see economic agreements being drafted without IMF conditions. They see a future where their resources aren't extracted by foreign corporations, but invested in their own development. That's not a political slogan. That's a promise being built in real time. Is this the moment everything changes, or will the old powers find a way to break it? Drop your take, because the stakes just got even higher. What's fueling this energy is deeper than geopolitics. It's dignity. For decades, the Sahel has been framed as a problem, a zone of instability, a breeding ground for extremism, a region that needed saving. But the people living there never bought that narrative. They knew the instability came from foreign meddling. They knew the extremism was fed by inequality and neglect. They knew they didn't need saving. They needed sovereignty. And now, with Chad joining AES, that narrative is being rewritten, not by Western journalists or think tank analysts, by the people themselves. The public morale shift is undeniable. There's a sense that after years of being sidelined, the Sahel is finally being led by its own. Not by elites beholden to Paris or Washington. Not by politicians who spent more time in European capitals than their own countries, but by leaders who are prioritizing regional interests, who are building alliances based on mutual respect, who are refusing to play by rules designed to keep them dependent. And that's what's shaking the old order. Because when populations start believing in their own power, when they start trusting their own leaders, the entire architecture of foreign control collapses. This isn't just about military bases or diplomatic realignments. It's about a generation reclaiming their future. The youth see Traore and Chad's partnership as proof that African nations don't need Western aid to survive. They don't need foreign troops to be secure. They don't need external validation to govern. The Alliance of Sahel States is showing them that collective action works, that regional solidarity is stronger than dependence, that self-determination isn't a fantasy, it's a strategy. What no one expected was how fast the momentum would build. Chad's move wasn't just a policy shift, it was a spark. And the people are fanning the flames, because this is their moment. Their leaders are finally choosing them, and they're not letting go. The old rules just got shredded, and the West is scrambling to pick up the pieces. Chad and Ibrahim Traoré didn't just form an alliance. They detonated a geopolitical bomb that's rippling across continents, shattering the carefully constructed architecture of Western dominance in Africa. For decades, France and the United States operated in the Sahel like it was their backyard, extracting resources, planting military bases, pulling political strings, deciding which leaders stayed and which ones fell. But that era just ended. The Alliance of Sahel States isn't asking for a seat at the table. It's flipping the table over. And the message is crystal clear. Africa is no longer a playground for foreign powers. The monopoly is broken. You need to understand what just collapsed. For generations, Western influence in Africa was built on access. Access to uranium, gold, oil, rare earth minerals. Access to land for military installations. Access to governments willing to play ball. Chad was the crown jewel of that system, a strategic anchor where French troops stationed themselves and American drones took flight. It was the linchpin holding together a network of control that stretched across the entire region. But now, Chad just walked away, and it didn't walk alone. It joined Traore, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in a bloc that's not just resisting Western interference, it's actively dismantling it. The ramifications are seismic. France is losing its military footprint, base by base, nation by nation. The United States is watching its counterterrorism infrastructure crumble as allies become adversaries. And the broader Western order, the one that assumed Africa would always need saving, always need managing, always need intervention, is facing an existential crisis. Because the Alliance of Sahel States isn't collapsing into chaos like the old playbook predicted. It's organizing, it's coordinating, it's building a parallel structure that doesn't require Western approval or Western aid. And that terrifies the powers that have profited from African dependency for centuries. Is this the end of Western dominance in Africa, or just the beginning of a much uglier fight? Drop your take, because what's unfolding behind the scenes is even more intense. What makes this shift so dangerous to the status quo is the precedent. If Chad and Traore succeed, if they can maintain security, build economic resilience, and defend their sovereignty without Western troops or Western money, then the entire logic of neo-colonial control evaporates. Suddenly, Every African nation watching this unfold starts asking the same question. Why do we need them? Why do we need French bases? Why do we need IMF conditions? Why do we need foreign powers deciding our policies? And once that question spreads, the geopolitical balance doesn't just shift, it shatters. The West is used to operating freely, used to setting the terms, used to being the indispensable partner. But the Alliance of Sahel States is proving that indispensability is a myth. That regional solidarity can replace foreign dependency. That African nations can defend their own interests without outsourcing sovereignty. And that's the real threat. Not to Africa's future, to the West's grip on it. This isn't just about military bases or mining contracts. It's about power. Who holds it? Who defines it? Who controls the narrative? For decades, the story was that Africa needed the West to survive. That without French security guarantees or American counterterrorism operations, the continent would descend into chaos. But Chad and Traoré just rewrote that story. They're showing the world that Africa doesn't need saving. It needs sovereignty, and it's taking it back. What no one expected was how fast the cracks would spread. Chad's decision isn't isolated. It's contagious. Other nations are watching. Other leaders are calculating. The multipolar order everyone talked about in theory, it's happening in practice. And it's being led by Africans who are done being exploited, done being manipulated, done being told they're not ready to govern themselves.